So proteins can be classified based on shape. There's three shapes. Fibrous proteins have a long shape. Globular proteins have more of a spherical or globular shape. And membrane proteins are found within cell membranes. So here's some characteristics of the fibrous proteins and the globular proteins. We're not really going to talk about the membrane proteins because we already kind of talked about them. Fibrous proteins are water insoluble, while the globular proteins are generally water soluble. Fibrous proteins usually have a single type of secondary structure. Globular proteins often contain several different kinds. Fibrous proteins are going to provide support and external protection. Those are their functions in the organism. Globular proteins are generally involved in metabolic chemistry, catalysis, transport, and regulation. There's a larger number of different kinds of globular proteins, but the fibrous proteins are present in larger amount. So if you compare the actual mass of fibrous versus globular proteins in an organism, there'd be more mass of fibrous proteins. But if you looked at the numbers of different kinds, there'd be more globular proteins. So we're going to talk about a couple examples of each. Alpha-keratin is a fibrous protein. It's found in protective coatings like hair, feathers, horns, turtle shells, etc. These individual molecules are almost entirely alpha helices. So we got an alpha helix, and then you get two alpha helices that coil up. And then you get two of these coils that are going to pair up, and that's called a protofilament. And then you take those and put those together, and you end up with a microfilament. So it's this long structure and this intertwining, a little bit like making rope. Okay, you know, if you take a piece of rope and start pulling it apart, there's smaller pieces inside, but when you twist them all together, they become very strong. So there are disulfide bridges that form between coils, and those are really important. Some keratins are hard, like, you know, the horn of a sheep is going to be very hard. Turtle shells are hard. Others, like feathers, contain keratin, but they're not hard and stiff. And the difference is that the hard ones have more disulfide bridges than the softer ones. Collagen is another fibrous protein, and this is the most abundant protein in humans. It's a major part of your tendons, ligaments, blood vessels, and your skin. This has a triple helix, so it's got three helices that are twisted around each other. It doesn't make alpha helices because of the proline. Proline is an amino acid, and it's included in the primary structure, and it prevents these proteins from making alpha helices. So the molecules are really long and thin and very rigid, and you can get stiffening by more cross-linking. And that's what happens, like when you get a callus, there are various things that can happen where your skin will get thicker and stiffer, and that's from additional cross-linking. Hemoglobin is a globular protein. It's a tetramer. It has 4 units. We saw a picture of it back when we talked about quaternary structure. It has 4 different protein sections that are all together, and then it also has heme groups. Each unit has a heme group, and this is the structure of heme. And this iron ion in the middle is very instrumental in the function of this, which is to transport oxygen from the lungs to the tissue. That's a globular protein. Myoglobin is another globular protein, and we've seen some pictures of the various types of structure of that. This functions as an oxygen storage molecule. Hemoglobin transports oxygen. It's in your blood, and that's why it's important to have enough iron in your blood. If you're anemic, you get tired because your blood can't transport oxygen as well. But the myoglobin stores it. This is a monomer. It also has a heme unit because that's what grabs onto the oxygen. We can also classify proteins based on their functions. And the functions are due to 3 factors. Proteins can bind small molecules specifically and strongly, and this allows them to have many different functions. They can also bind other proteins to form fiber-like structures, and they can bind to cell membranes as well. Your book has this lovely long list of different functions of proteins, and you really should read this section in your book. I'm not gonna take the time right now to read all of that. Some of these we've talked about, but proteins have structural functions like the alpha keratin that's in a turtle shell. Myoglobin that we just mentioned is a storage protein, stores oxygen. Buffer proteins, hemoglobin not only transports oxygen in your blood, but also acts as a buffer and helps to keep the pH level of your blood in the correct range. So lots of different functions. And this is not even a comprehensive list of the different functions of proteins. Glycoproteins contain carbohydrates. We mentioned that way back at the beginning of the chapter. Collagen is an example of a glycoprotein. It's a fibrous protein. It contains two non-standard amino acids. So what these are derivatives of proline and lysine, but they have an extra hydroxyl group on them. 5-hydroxylysine and 4-hydroxyproline. So they're very similar to standard amino acids, but they've got that extra hydroxy group on it. And it's this hydroxy group that will attach to the carbohydrate units by glycosidic linkages. So those carbohydrate groups, I believe they're mostly mono and disaccharides, are going to function in cross-linking. And so the collagen has a triple helix and assembles into collagen fibrils, and then the carbohydrate groups are what are important in the cross-linking effect. If you boil collagen, it gets converted to gelatin, and that's because the heat causes denaturation by rupturing the hydrogen bonds. And this is one reason that when you cook meat, it becomes more tender. And if you take a very tough cut of meat and cook it long and slow, what will happen is some of the collagen will get converted to gelatin, and the collagen is that tough stuff that makes the meat hard to chew. My husband's real big into smoking ribs. And there's a certain temperature that you have to get the meat up to and hold it at that temperature. I think it's like 225 or so. If you can keep it above that for a period of time, then you get the collagen converting to gelatin, and you get these ribs that just fall off the bone. They're awesome. Sorry to make you hungry. Another glycoprotein group are immunoglobulins. These are globular proteins also. These are produced in response to invasion of microorganisms or foreign molecules. They serve as antibodies. So immunoglobulins are antibodies, but there are also other antibodies that are not immunoglobulins. And they react to specific antigens. And by antigen, we just mean a foreign substance that's invading the body. And your immune system is capable of producing immunoglobulins that respond to several million different antigens. It's pretty amazing. I'm not sure why that's there. Then we have lipoproteins. These involve lipids conjugated with proteins. These are important in transporting lipids through the bloodstream because the lipids are not soluble in water, and yet your body needs them and has to move them around. So basically, these are a big transport carrier thing. Put all the lipids on the inside and surround it with these lipoproteins. So they put all the polar sections on the outside and the nonpolar on the inside. So plasma proteins are involved in transporting lipids in the bloodstream. There's 4 major classes, the chylomicrons. These take the dietary triacylglycerols, which we've talked about, from your intestine to your liver and to your fat tissue. So these are working on the food that you eat. And the very low density lipoproteins are going to transport triacylglycerols that you made in your liver to your fat tissue. The low density lipoproteins take cholesterol from the liver to cells throughout the body. And the high density lipoproteins collect that excess cholesterol and bring it back to the liver so it can be taken apart and used for bile acids. So the high density lipoproteins are the ones that you want to make sure that you have enough of, because they're going to get rid of the extra cholesterol. Whether the lipoprotein is high, low, or very low in density has to do with the fractions of protein and lipid materials. So, and when they talk about very low density, it actually is the density. So the high density ones have more protein, and the low density ones have less protein.
Yes. 250.